We're good.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. The presidential primary season is upon us. Next week, New Hampshireites will be going to the polls to cast their votes and to set the stage for the rest of the presidential primary season. So who do you think will win? Will it be Trump? Will he trump all the other Republican candidates? Or will Cruz or Rubio emerge as the winner? It seems like it's a three-person race at this point. On the Democratic side, we have Clinton versus Sanders. Will Sanders and his energized grassroots campaign defeat the established Clinton political machine? It'll be interesting to see. Having attended high school and college in New Hampshire, I was able to see some of the candidates firsthand in person. I remember going to a speech at UNH given by Jesse Jackson back in the 1984 primary. During his speech, he asked the audience, mostly students, how many of you are registered to vote? Not seeing very many hands raised, he proceeded to stop talking, and he led us all out of the Memorial Union building, walked us down Main Street in Durham to the town hall, and tried to get us all registered to vote right then and there. This experience really sort of energized me toward presidential politics, and I've taken an interest ever since. Being older now, and a little bit more cynical, I still think, however, it's important to make a good decision. But that's not easy to do. Bias runs rampant in presidential campaigns. Communications from the media and the candidates all contain bias. So again, how do we make a good decision? I contend that that's through critical thinking and using our intuition. There are several steps in the decision-making process. First, we can prioritize the issues and try to match those up against the issues of the candidates. We can do this by researching the candidates online, listening to the debates, or seeing them speak in person. The problem is that there's bias still in all those sources. So what kind of biases exist, and how do we look out for them? Well, the first kind of bias is called listening bias. As listeners, we are at the mercy of the speaker. You guys are sitting there listening to me. My body language, the way I speak, my personal appearance, could influence how you feel about me. Bernie Sanders, for example, is fun to watch. Next slide. If you look at the slide, you can see that he talks with his hands and has a lot of energy, like he's trying to rally the troops. If we agree with his message, and we find this mannerisms, this body language appealing, well, then that can influence our decision-making process. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, is more poised, confident, intelligent, and is always dressed impeccably. All right? That kind of bias would be called the halo effect. She's almost angelic, hence the name halo effect. The third type of bias that's present in listening bias is availability bias. Candidates try to flood the press and the media with their message, knowing that the more often that we hear it, and the easier it is to hear, the more credible it becomes. Another form of bias is media bias. All news outlets are biased. Next slide. As you can see it. Oops. You go to. Oh, sorry, I can't see it. Oh, I skipped the thing. Sorry. All right, so anyways, media bias. So with media bias, all news outlets are biased. As this chart shows, some news outlets like the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and MSNBC all tend to represent the issues in a more liberal point of view and take their stances, while the Fox News, the Drudge Report, Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck all reflect more conservative views. Okay. To counteract the bias, we must look at the reporting objectively and see if all the facts are being presented and see that they're being weighted equally. If some of the facts are omitted intentionally or they're distorted, that would be called deliberate bias. We can see here that the New York Times stated that Bernie Sanders was raising more super PAC money than Hillary Clinton was. However, on the next slide, Another source did some research and found that, yes, Bernie Sanders raised more money in only one small section of super PAC funding, and that Hillary Clinton raised way more money than he did. And that's really not surprising. This was a New York Times reporter. The New York Times endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. So there is deliberate bias. But as the reader, you wouldn't know that unless you did some research. Another type of bias is called subtle bias. Next slide. So if a news agency covers a candidate more than another, covers one candidate more than another, that would be a subtle way of showing bias toward that candidate. As you can see on the screen here, if we were to show just pictures of Donald Trump like this, he would look fine, and that would be very favorable. But if you showed only pictures of the other, it's more negative. So bias can be subtle as well. One other notable bias is the bandwagon effect. People love to jump on the bandwagon. So as soon as a campaign starts to gain some momentum, people will jump on the bandwagon to support that candidate. I contend that Donald Trump benefited from this effect earlier on. Several people jumped on the bandwagon after they saw his early success, despite the fact that he makes so many controversial statements. It'll be interesting to see if Marco Rubio does better in New Hampshire based on his strong effort in Iowa, and then he would be benefiting from the bandwagon effect as well. Now that we have aligned our positions with those of the candidates and managed the bias, there are a few other things that we can do and look at before making a final decision. First, we can see if there are any deal-breaker issues. For example, if I'm a gun owner and collector and a strong advocate of the Second Amendment, and one of the candidates wants to enact stronger gun control laws, I might eliminate that candidate from consideration right away. Another issue might be the amount of money raised. If a candidate hasn't raised enough money and won't be able to endure the entire campaign, maybe I won't vote for that candidate. Or conversely, if one of the candidates is receiving huge support from super PACs, I may choose not to vote for that candidate because I think they're going to be biased going into office and owe favors. The last component of making a smart decision is trusting your intuition. Intuition is developed from your prior experiences, maybe a message that the candidate, you connected with a message from the candidate, or their professional history, something about them resonates with you. And so when I'm trying to decide on a candidate, I look at all the issues first and try to narrow down the field, but I always go with my gut feel and intuition before making a final decision. That definitely impacts me. So you can see, selecting a candidate is hard. Okay, it's a difficult process, but being a good critical thinker can make it a lot easier. So, as the primaries unfold and we get closer to our own, let's make well-informed decisions based on critical thinking and intuition, and not based on bias and sound bites. Thank you, and vote well in 2016.